Welcome back, everybody, and here we are for Chapter 3, Section 4, Matter in an Ecosystem. Basically here we're going to look at the four major cycles that we hit: water cycle, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, and phosphate cycle. I'm going to be honest with you. The one you really need to focus on is going to be the nitrogen cycle. It's not that you don't need to know the others, but when it comes to the AP test, they hit the nitrogen cycle pretty hard. So I'm going to go through them all here fairly equally. In class, we'll do a little bit more to break down some of the nitrogen cycle and doing some calculations and looking at the formulas, but without any others, here we go. The main thing we want to look at is just the cycle itself, and we also, it's environmental science, we want to focus on human impact. So how are these cycles being impacted by humans is going to be one of the big things we want to look at. Okay, here we go. Right off the bat, water cycle. This one's good. We're very familiar with it. It's just in the water cycle, it collects water. The cycle itself, the evaporation, purifies water, and then it distributes this fixed supply of water. Remember, if it's not here, it's not coming. Law of conservation of matter. We can't create it, we can't destroy it. It can only get transformed. All the atoms, etc., are on the planet, how they remain and exist, and the water cycle helps keep distributing this fixed amount of water. All right. Very simply, one that we're all very familiar with. Incoming solar energy causes the evaporation. The water evaporates. Hot air, hot water, hot air rises. So this evaporated water is rising. The higher up in the troposphere it gets, the colder it gets. So it begins to condense. It condenses back into water droplets, forming into clouds. As the droplets get large enough, it then precipitates back to Earth in the form of rain, snow, sleet, hail, what have you. And it's this gravity that pulls the water back down to the planet and has it go through the runoff back to the lowest area. So we have the solar energy causing the evaporation, the cooling causing condensation, gravity taking back over, causing it to fall down to the Earth, and then making its way to the lowest point: oceans, lakes, rivers, etc. And then some of this precipitation winds up getting stored as groundwater, either in aquifers or underground rivers, lakes, etc. So as you look at the pictures of the water cycle, it's kind of got it highlighted in two different forms. The blue, it almost looks white here, but in the book you can see the very light blue or almost white ones are definitely the blue arrows, are signifying this is just kind of nature doing its thing. Whether it's the sun causing to evaporate, condensation, falling back to the ground, etc. This is just all natural. Highlighted in the red, and with the red areas, are the ways that humans are altering or affecting the water cycle. All right, first off, we withdraw large amounts of fresh water, and we can do it at rates faster than nature can actually replace it. The Colorado River, the one that carved out the Grand Canyon, doesn't even make it to the sea anymore. We take off a little bit here, we take off a little bit here, take off a little bit here, and it's just a trickle. It just peters out. Doesn't even make it to the ocean anymore. So we pull the water off to use it for different things, and we can do it at rates faster than nature can actually replenish it. We're pumping water out of the aquifer here in Florida. Recently, some companies have come in to pump the water up, to bottle it, to sell. Well, it's an issue because they're pulling water out of the aquifer and then it's being shipped off to Wisconsin, Idaho, France, wherever, and the water is being pulled away from this area. Just can create issues. We can take it out faster than it can naturally replace. We clear out vegetation. We deforest trees, or we cut things down to put in a Walmart or my neighborhood, houses, etc. And when we cut down the forest, it increases runoff. and this decreases the infiltration. Once again, kind of like with the rocks I showed, if they were very permeable, the water went through quickly. Well, if it's not as permeable, then the water has a chance to run off. Vegetation helps break it up, make it more permeable. Without all the trees and vegetation, more just runs off into the ground, doesn't soak into the ground. Draining and filling wetlands. We've looked at wetlands historically as, bad places. Let's fill them in and then we can reclaim that land and put houses on it or farms, etc. Well, what we've kind of learned is they're natural flood control, because that's where all the low-lying area is, and when it does rain too much, the wetlands take care of it for us. The wetlands also help remove a lot of pollutants, and when we get rid of them, it can cause issues. These are our overflows, so they're kind of water sinks, areas that water gets stored and then it can slowly make its way back down into the ground. Getting rid of those, not such a great idea, as we found out. Anyway, water cycle. Focus on the natural aspects and how humans have affected it. Now with the water cycle, we're going to take a little pause out. Water has some very interesting and unique properties from some other liquids, etc. Water stays liquid over a very large range of temperature. Like alcohol, it evaporates much faster than water does. Its boiling temperature is much lower. So water stays liquid over a really large temperature range, talking Celsius from 0 to 100 degrees. It remains liquid. It changes temperature very slowly because it has a high specific heat. It takes a lot of energy to actually warm water up, but because it takes a lot of energy to warm it up, once it is warm, it retains that heat for a long time. So the ocean retains a lot of global heat, and that affects temperatures along coastlines all around the world. But this is a very important thing from water. It does take a lot of energy for water to actually evaporate. Once again, alcohol evaporates much quicker than water does. It can dissolve a lot of things, a high variety. It's known as the universal solvent. Many things, most things in fact, will dissolve in water. Now it may take a long time, but you drop a nail in and eventually it will dissolve it. It'll rust it away into nothingness in time. So many things will actually dissolve in water. We know that with sugar and salt and many other things. It filters out wavelengths of UV radiation. Just like the ozone layer acts as a filter to take out a lot of the harmful radiation, well, water does it too, and this provides protection for a lot of aquatic organisms. A friend of mine, Mr. Johnson, we were kayaking. Well, we were looking for his phone the next morning. We couldn't find it. We were looking everywhere, and we had stopped just upstream, a quarter mile upstream. We looked at camping at that spot, decided we didn't like it, and went down to the next one. I thought, maybe you dropped it there. And I went back up to that area, and sure enough, in about a foot of water was his phone. And I thought, oh, that's not good. Well, I reached down, perfectly clear water. We're in the, these are spring-fed waters, perfectly clear for that thing. I reached down and picked up his phone, and it was facing me. I picked it up, and as soon as that phone came out of the water, I started getting the text messages. Ding, 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 ding. We're coming through. It was blocking some of that EM waves, electromagnetic waves, in this case specifically microwaves. But as soon as it came out of the water, the microwaves were able to be communicated from the cell tower and all the text started pinging in. Yes, his phone survived a night in water. Never was quite the same, but it still functioned. But anyway, the water can filter out a lot of UV radiation. This protects the organisms in there, whether it's plants, animals, etc. Also, water expands when it freezes. Now, normally when something condenses, it means it gets closer together. The molecules get closer together. But in water, when it actually freezes, its molecular structure, its crystalline structure, causes it to expand a little bit. This is unique. Almost everything else, when you freeze it, it gets smaller, but not water. A unique feature with All right, moving into the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle. Once again, as I kind of throw the carbon cycle back up here, remember you want to focus on the 2 points. Just kind of a natural nature carbon cycle and how humans affect it. That part's in red. Right. Carbon. It's very important. It is the building block of life. You and I are carbon-based life forms, trees, hydrocarbons. We all are complex carbon chains. You get into college, you take organic chemistry, and that's what you're learning about, how all these carbon chains tie and work together. But it makes up our carbohydrates, it makes up our fats, it makes up the proteins, things like DNA, RNA, etc. Carbon is this building block of life, if you will. Photosynthesis from producers remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Tree needs carbon dioxide. Water carbon dioxide rearranges the atoms to form C6H12O6, glucose. So they're pulling it out of the atmosphere. So this is aerobic when there's enough oxygen present by producers, consumers, decomposers. Now you and I, these aerobic respirators, we need oxygen in order to convert it. We're putting carbon dioxide back in the air. So photosynthesis is taking it out, and aerobic respiration by consumers, decomposers, etc. are putting it back in. Over the millions of years that the planet has been here, carbon and dead plant matter and algae, etc. can be converted into fossil fuels. And once again, coal, by and large, is plant matter that's a fossil fuel. Oil, by and large, is animal matter converted in. But in time, this carbon can be converted into fossil fuel. That means it's a storage of it. The carbon is being stored in the fossil fuel, not in the atmosphere. And also, CO2 dissolves in the ocean. Just like oxygen dissolves in water, that's how fish breathe. They're pulling the oxygen out of the water. Carbon dioxide also dissolves in the water, sits on it, and it slowly dissolves in, makes its way into the ocean. And then it gets stored in many of the marine sediments and even gets stored in certain aspects of shells, organisms. So these are some of the aspects of carbon, which is just kind of the normal, natural take as we're looking in the picture. And let's look at some of the human additions or whatever. Humans have done a lot to add lots of CO2 to the environment. And this is something that we've heard about with global warming and fossil fuel burning, etc. But basically, anytime something burns, once again, if I'm burning calories, I'm breathing out carbon dioxide. I need oxygen to burn the calories, and then I produce carbon dioxide. We burn a tree, and we're releasing carbon dioxide. There's a lot of hydrocarbons in the tree. If I burn it for fuel, for fire, for heat, to cook, as I burn it, it releases that carbon back into the atmosphere. I burn coal, or I burn oil in a car, or at the power company, we're releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Ever since 1960, we have seen those rates really sharply increase. And we can tie a lot of that directly to humans. We've burned fossil fuels 24/7. Cars driving 24/7, somewhere on the planet all the time. Energy is has to be created continuously. So even in Gainesville, we're burning coal 24/7 to generate our electricity. A lot of carbon is being released back into the atmosphere. And some of the result of that is a warming of the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, meaning it captures and re-radiates heat as it's lost. Not all molecules do this. Oxygen, not a greenhouse gas. Nitrogen, not a greenhouse gas. Water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, these are some of the bigger ones that do re-radiate heat, trapping warmth. Now once again, greenhouse effect is important. Without it, you and I aren't alive. But too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. My mom was famous for that statement in our house. I really liked it, yes, but too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. The greenhouse effect, not a bad thing. Too much of it can be. Another thing that humans do is clearing out vegetation. As we cut down trees or we get rid of grass to put in a parking lot, well, we don't have plants to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. When we kill the plants and then they rot and decompose, they release their carbon back into the atmosphere, and now we don't have new plants here in order to take carbon dioxide out. So the more plants we get rid of, they're not there to scrub carbon out of the atmosphere. These are just some of the ways that humans have affected the carbon cycle. Taking us to the nitrogen cycle. Guys, read this carefully in the book. Make sure you go through the outline. I've got some things in the outline I don't highlight here as much. We'll kind of hit some of those in class, but make sure you focus on this one. It's hit heavy on the test. It'll be heavy on my test as well. I'm telling you now, make sure you know it. All right, nitrogen. Nitrogen is what makes up 78% of our air. It's an inert gas. We breathe it in, we breathe it out. But it is not directly usable by most organisms in this gaseous state. We call it an inert gas. It's just there, most things can't use it. We breathe it in, we breathe it out, not a big deal. We need to get it converted into a useful form of nitrogen. Now, this happens by and large in two ways. Lightning strike can convert nitrogen into a nitrite or a nitrate, NO2 or NO3, which can be used by organisms, plants, etc., or by nitrogen fixing bacteria. It's a specialized bacteria that is in the topsoil and some of the bottom sediment of some aquatic areas. But by far, nitrogen fixing bacteria are what convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form of nitrogen that plants can use. Nitrogen is very important to a plant cycle for it to be able to grow. Without it, it's a limiting factor again. But bacteria are out there converting it into usable forms of nitrogen. They use it to produce the proteins, the nucleic acids, RNA, DNA, etc., and vitamins that the plants need, and then also you and I need. So the plants convert it, they get their nitrogen from the nitrogen-fixing bacteria or some lightning strike. You and I, consumers, get it by eating the plants. And after we eat it, we die, it goes back into the ground or back into the air, and the cycle goes round and round. Let me give you a hint. If you need to find the nitrogen cycle out of a list of A, B, C, D, it's pretty easy. It starts with nitrogen gas, N2, and it ends with nitrogen gas, N2. So you'll have nitrogen gas, it gets converted into ammonia by a form of bacteria, which breaks down into a nitrate or a nitrite. A plant takes that in. When the plant dies, other bacteria break it back down and turn it back into a gas. So if you're looking for the pure nitrogen cycle, it always starts with N2 and it will end with N2. You can sort of forget about all the other stuff. You're looking for that to find out what it is. Because you can look at the ammonia cycle or the nitrate cycle, how things go from back to ammonia, but in this case, just the pure nitrogen cycle, gas, all the way back to nitrogen gas. So, and this is where some of the bacteria, certain species of bacteria are nitrogen fixing bacteria. Other species of bacteria entirely convert the ammonia, a dead animal, back into N2, back into nitrogen gas. So bacteria do both, but two complete different species of bacteria. And once again, we want to look at just the nature, what nature is doing, but also what humans do to affect it. Now, when we burn gasoline, in oil, gasoline, it's hydrocarbons, but it also has some nitrogens in it attached. So when you fire up a car, you're in the bus, you're driving down, it's releasing the exhaust. In the exhaust fumes are some nitrates. These nitrates turns into NO2. So this nitric oxide, NO2, nitric oxide, goes up into the air. NO2 in the presence of H2O, say in a cloud, combine to form nitric acid, acid rain. Two predominant forms of acid rain, nitric acid and sulfuric acid. We'll talk about how sulfuric acid is created later. But we burn them in our fuels, releases nitric oxide, NO2, goes up into the atmosphere, warm air rises, makes it into clouds, interacts with water, comes back as acid rain. Also, we remove large amounts of nitrogen from the atmosphere to make fertilizers. One of the components of fertilizer is nitrogen. It's basically phosphates or phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium are what plants need to really grow. So we just pull it out of the air in a chemical form and put that into the ground as a fertilizer. Adding these excess nitrates, also we fertilize our ground. Well, it runs off and it makes it into the water ecosystems, and that's what causes algae blooms, lots of various problems. So human adding nitrogen into the environment have really sharply increased, and we expect them to continue to increase because we use fertilizers more and more to help our crops to grow. But if we're not careful and that makes its way off into the runoff, into our water systems, then we get the algae blooms, which actually causes a lot of problems. So anyway, some of the ways that humans have affected the nitrogen cycle. And it's kind of like this last little graph, we're looking at how the red line again, humans, how much we have really increased the input of nitrogen into the atmosphere. You know, whether it's burning gasoline, which is a lot of it, creating of fertilizers, various different things, but just the way that humans have increased it. And that takes us to the phosphorus cycle. Now, the phosphorus cycle has a nice unique thing that can really help you out. It's always in a solid, never part of the atmosphere. Basically, it goes from rocks into the plants, into consumers, animals, plants, you and me. We die and it goes back into the ground. So never in a gaseous state. All right. Phosphorus, it'll cycle through the water, through the earth crust, and then living animals. The major reservoir or phosphorus sink are rocks. It's created in the crust, in the Earth's core, pushed up, and it cycles very slowly. Since it's in the rocks, it has to break out of the rocks, get out into the ground, absorbed by plants, etc. Now, human impacts as well. Once again, we want to focus on the nature site as well as human activities. When we talk about the nature site, it really is fairly simple. Starts in the rocks, it gets weathered, broken down, leaches out of the rock. Plants then take it in because they need it as part of their growth cycle to be healthy, create the minerals they need. Animals eat it, or the plant itself dies, and then when the other animal dies, it goes back down into the ground and the cycle continues. Some of the human activities that really affect it, well, clearing of forests. We cut down the forest, get rid of the vegetation, causes increased runoff, causing the rocks to weather faster. We also remove large amounts of phosphates just from the earth in order to make fertilizers. Because you go to Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, wherever, you buy a bag of fertilizer to fertilize your roses, your plants, your grass, what have you. Well, we're just making that in a lab. So we're pulling nitrogen out of the air, we're pulling phosphorus out of rocks, we're literally mining it, selling it, putting it in the rocks, and also potassium. Those are the three main ingredients that we put in fertilizer. And then we put that fertilizer back in the lawn. If we're not careful, then the water washes the fertilizers off and it goes into the streams, and too much in the streams can cause the aquatic ecosystems to have a bit of a problem. So phosphorus is kind of our last one that we have. But once again, remember, it's always in a solid state. Basically from rock, leaches into the ground, plants pull it out of the ground, consumers take it from the plants, everything dies, decomposers put it back into the ground. Rocks are the main sink or reservoir at it. Well, that is it for section 3.4, looking at how matter cycles around in the ecosystems. We'll see you next time when we just look at some of the ways that scientists actually study these ecosystems. Take care, guys. We'll see you.